we are live, so whenever you guys are ready.
All right, are we ready? Mr. Mayor, do you want to call the meeting to order formally?
Yes, I will. Thank you. This time I'll call to order the General Plan Advisory Committee meeting of April 13th, 2021. Go ahead, sir.
All right, thank you. I think most of you know me. I'm David Early with PlaceWorks, and I'm the lead consultant working with a team here. Tonight, joining me are Carrie Stone, who's our project manager, as well as Todd Bressie, who is our arts consultant based outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, but an expert on arts programs within the context of planning nationwide. And so we're very pleased to have Todd on our team as well. I'm going to share my screen, which always takes me a moment, and then we will go from there. I think, let's see. Okay, so now you should see a slide that says that this is Policy Options Part 4, Meeting 7 of the General Plan Advisory Committee. I will take roll. I believe we are missing a few members, and we'll make a note later as they come in.
I see Mr. Hugh Boy is now on.
Oh, great. Okay, so why don't I do this just formally, just for the record. Mayor Velazquez?
Here.
Councilmember Azendes?
Present.
Commissioner Huboy?
Present.
Commissioner Stevens? I believe she's absent. We'll let folks know when she comes in. Member Evans?
Here.
Member Rebecki? You might be on mute, Mr. Rebecki. I know Larry was here. There he is. And Member Johnson?
Here.
Great, thank you. Just a review of tonight's meeting. I'll go over the agenda. We have a time for GPAC members to disclose any comments or issues that they've addressed over the last week since our previous meeting. We'll take public comment on any items that are not on the agenda. And then we have two major pieces of business tonight. One is to wrap up the talk about residential land use designations and residential issues, which we didn't get to last time. And we'll have a staff report on that, take questions, take public comment, and then have GPAC discussion. And then we'll have a more in-depth discussion about arts and culture. We'll do a presentation on that, and we actually have some polling questions, and we'll have a time for more extensive public discussion of the arts issues. And then we'll come back to the GPAC for final direction on that. So that's our meeting for this evening. I do want just to remind everyone that these meetings are being recorded. We've had a roll call in this brief overview. There will be two public comment periods, well, actually three tonight. There will be one for the items not on the agenda, and then one for each of the two agenda items. I will be enforcing a 3-minute time limit, and folks should have registered through the Zoom link to get to the meeting tonight. I want to remind everyone also that the GPAC can only comment and discuss those items that are on the agenda tonight. If any other items are brought up at any point in the discussion, GPAC members can ask us to agendize them for a future meeting, but cannot discuss or comment on them this evening. So it says here public comment, but let me first ask if any members of the GPAC have any contact with members of the public to disclose since last week's meeting.
None for me.
Okay, and I hear none in general. So let me ask then if there are any public comment on items not on the agenda. And because I'm sharing my screen, I can't see public raising their hand. So if another staff person could alert me if anyone is doing that, that would be great.
We do. I'll Rob Rodriguez.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Rodriguez, go ahead for items not on tonight's agenda.
Hey, thank you for allowing me the chance to talk. I'm just here again to talk about public outreach on the, social media, through the news. Like, I'm not seeing much at all that, like the social media, it's doing the bare minimum. I imagine we're paying PlaceWorks quite a bit. I don't know what their part in public outreach is, but I mean, if we're not doing in-person community workshops. I imagine the budget on that is quite a bit more expensive. So I don't know, are we paying for that and we're not getting it? And then I mean, could that money be spent, doing the public outreach for us through the social media? Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Can you
Mr.
hear? Hello, this is the test. Can you hear this? Hello?
Yes, I'm not sure who we just heard from, but yes, is that Larry, Mr. Rebecki? We did hear you. Mr. Rebecki, did you want to speak at this time?
I think he was just testing his microphone.
Okay, all right. We did hear you, Mr. Rebecki. All
Okay.
right, Eva, did you see any other members of the public wanting to speak on items not on the agenda?
I don't have any other hands raised at this time, David.
Okay, thank you. In that case, we will go on. Just a brief reminder about the process that we've been in so far. This is the 4th of 5 meetings on policy options for the general plan. We did hold 2 community workshops about policy options on March 9th and 10th. And we've also had an online survey open for over a month now, and it remains open and will be open for at least another week. And we're actually looking at extending that deadline a little. We have been gathering public input through both those means, and we have already had 3 GPAC meetings on key land use and land use policy issues for the general plan that were held on March 23rd, March 30th, and April 6th. So the 3 Tuesdays before tonight. Tonight, as I already mentioned, we'll be wrapping up our discussion about residential zoning and then talk about arts. And then on April 27th, we have one final meeting within this series to talk about climate change, sustainability, and hazard planning. That will be the end of these 5 GPAC meetings. The GPAC has given us great insights so far, very clear guidance, and we'll be compiling all of that and bringing it to the Planning Commission for a review meeting at the end of May and the City Council review at the end of June. Those dates are not yet set. We do anticipate them at the end of each of those months, and we are attempting to schedule them as workshop settings where they'll be the only item on the agenda as opposed to being one item on a regularly scheduled meeting of either the commission or the council. So they will be standalone meetings. And those are still to be scheduled, but we'll get word out about that. We have been looking at a series of topics, and we've already made it through 21 different topics that are listed in the left 2 columns of these slides. We also, tonight, we are looking at residential land use designations and arts and culture. And then, as I mentioned, at the next meeting, we'll be looking at climate change, sustainability, and natural hazards. So I'm going to go right into a discussion on the residential land use designations. I did go over most of this last time as well, and the GPAC members asked some questions, but I just want to go over the issues again since we are going to be looking at them this evening. The first of these is the high density residential designation. As I mentioned last time, state law requires you through your housing element to demonstrate that you can accommodate all income levels within your regional housing needs allocation. And one of the ways the state does that is that it assumes that dwelling unit densities of 20 units or more per acre are affordable to low and very low income households. In Hollister today, there's only a zoning designation that goes from 12 up to 35. And state law also says that the state needs to assess that, and we need to assume that people will generally build at the lower end of those allowed densities, which is in fact borne out by the history in Hollister. So because of that, the state wouldn't count lands that are designated as 12 to 35 dwelling units per acre towards that very low or low income designation. Because of that, we're recommending that you develop a new residential designation that would split the 12 to 35. There would be one designation for 12 to 19 and another designation for 20 up to 35. And we believe you need to designate about 65 acres to meet a demand, to meet the likely demand for low and very low income units that we think you'll see in your housing element allocation later this year. So we've tried to put together an idea of where those sites might be. You have a map that you've seen already of locations where we think those might be, and those are shown both in existing high-density residential designations, which are here, and also in the pink areas in the North Gateway area, one high-density site down here. We did get some public comment at our workshops that perhaps the sites should be more dispersed throughout the city. Some folks thought over on the west side, others thought in other parts on the east side or south as well. Those were all considered at our workshop. We did also have a comment letter that arrived, I believe, just today from Chispa, one of the affordable housing developers in town, who suggested that city-owned property on Hill Street near Hill Park might be redesignated as well. And so I just put a map up here for that to point out that that letter did come from Chispa as well. That land is currently designated public. A couple of other items that we would like you to consider are the possibility of actually increasing the high end of the high density and downtown residential categories. Right now, your high density maxes out at 35 dwelling units per acre, which is actually pretty low compared to the kinds of apartments that we've seen being built in communities like Hollister. And for downtown buildings, mixed use buildings with several floors of residential above, those can easily get to 100 or 125 dwelling units per acre because they're pretty dense and the units are small. So we're looking for guidance from you on possibly increasing the maximum densities, both in high density and downtown areas to 65 and 125 acres respectively. We also have a very detailed issue for you to look at this evening, which is about net versus gross density. Right now, your general plan is based on the use of net density, which looks at an entire, which looks at only those portions of a parcel that can be developed. So if, for instance, you start with a 100-acre parcel and then put streets in, you might lose 30 acres to streets and parks and other features. So then you only have 70 acres left. So if you were allowing 10 units per acre and you were looking at gross density, you might expect to get 1,000 units there on a 100-acre site. And I say these numbers just an example. If you look at net density, you would only get 700. So your overall yield of units is much lower. We know that for many GPAC members, creating additional housing opportunities has been very important. So we're suggesting to you that you perhaps consider moving to gross density calculation instead of net density, and that you still keep the existing densities in place so that you will in fact have a higher yield. You could also consider asking us to continue to use net density, or you could shift to gross density and then lower the ranges so that you get the numbers that are currently produced while still at least using the clearer gross density definition. So that's a very detailed issue that you'll be giving us guidance on this evening as well. That concludes my presentation. We just have those 4 items, 2 of which are just the locations for a higher density residential, the 2 possible raises of the density maximums, and then this net versus gross density question. I want to open it up for your questions, and then we'll take public comment. Any questions from committee members? Okay, I hear none. We did have some questions last time, so that's not necessarily surprising. Let's go on and see if there are any public comments on this issue. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen just so we can all see each other a little better. I'm looking at the 4 members of the public who are here this evening, and I want to just ask if any of you have any comments on the issues that we just discussed. Also, while we're considering that, I want to note for the record that Roxanne Stevens has joined us, so we have all of the 7 members of the GPAC here at this point. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry for my lateness.
Okay, I don't see any hands raised from the public to talk about the residential issues. So I will turn it back to the GPAC, and I'm going to go back to sharing my screen so that we can all look at the issues. And I will go back up here to the residential, and I think I'll just put it here with this map. So the first question for all of you is whether you do agree with our recommendation that we would split your existing high density designation and create a new designation that has a minimum of 20 dwelling units per acre so as to meet the requirements of state law. And if so, where are the sites that you would like us to do that? Any comments or input on that?
I agree with the split, the numbers you recommended.
Okay, great. Why don't we take that question first? Is there anyone who has concerns about that? Planning commissioners, Chris Evans, Larry Rebecki, maybe a couple of you can chime in one way or another, just so we know if we have.
Yeah,
agreement.
I don't have any concerns. I want to make sure that our community is meeting all the state laws and everything. So, whatever you suggest is best to get us to that point. That's what I think we need to do.
Great, thank you.
Agree. I think higher density is needed, so I agree.
David?
Yes.
David Dubois here. I think when we're looking at increasing maximum residential density downtown, and I think this is a good time for me to disclose that we're working presently, we have a PUD in the works. It's for a DRC review for the site on 435 San Benito Street that had burned down, and we're designing a replacement mixed-use building for that site. Under the current land use zoning regulations that I will comment on, we have struggled a little bit, quite frankly. There is a 500 square feet of open space requirement per dwelling unit currently in the zoning code that and if we're looking at increasing the density from where it currently is, I think it's up to 25 dwelling units per acre, going up to 125 dwelling units per acre. That's what I believe you said. And I think that this will come down the line after we get through our land use designations and we change the zoning code. We're gonna have to look at, in the downtown environment, we're gonna have to look at that 500 square feet of open space requirement per unit. And that's my comment.
Great, thank you. But it sounds like overall you are supportive of the changes. Is that right?
Yes, I am. I am supportive of the changes. I do agree that increasing the density to 20 dwelling units per acre, generally speaking, it does help promote workforce housing, affordable, or also known as affordable housing. I think that ideally, when we were talking about extending the sphere of influence with the needed acreage for and focusing on workforce housing, I think that ideally, we need to look at the areas that are currently zoned for higher density, and then concur on which other areas geographically are worth considering for higher density.
Great, thank you. Let me go on then. It sounds like there is a consensus to go to the 20. Do any of you have comments about the sites called out on the map? I will say I really took it to heart when members of the community asked that these sites both perhaps be some of these shown, but also be dispersed somewhat, particularly out further west in town and perhaps other sites. So I would love to hear feedback about the sites that we do have on our map and whether you would agree with what we heard from the public that perhaps we should look for some in other parts of town as well.
Hi, this is Chris. Yeah, I think I was one of those people that kind of that brought something like that up from the public, and I think one of my concerns was, was the schools and compacting schools with, compacting schools with one demographic instead of having, those things evened out and dispersed throughout town a little bit more. So, we're more fluent with inclusion and things like that, and getting everybody mixed, because I think Hollister has a great reputation of doing that, and I think we need to continue doing that and helping ourselves as a community. And I know I looked at those those areas, and I saw just a couple schools getting impacted. And so that was one of my concerns with, it being, I guess, grouped there in the North County area, or the north part of town, excuse me, not county, but north part of town.
Right. So we might even lessen a few of these, or at least consider school issues, and then, as you say, Mr. Evans, consider some of these other sites, and perhaps some we heard about over a little further west also.
I have a question.
Yeah, that was my concern, but I'm willing to, I would love to hear more feedback and what other people think.
Councilmember Resendez, was that your voice?
Yeah, thank you. I'm just trying to follow along here. So the brown is the new residential.
No, thank you for asking. The brown and the pink both already carry designations that do allow for residential. The brown is high density commercial. The pink are sites within the North Gateway commercial. And so they are already non-residential, and we're suggesting redesignating them for the higher densities as well.
Okay, so we're creating a new residential designation with a minimum density of 20 dwelling units per acre. And you want to know where? Well, I'd like to know if the staff has ideas and why, because this map is not really good for me. I can't really tell where we're at or what we're looking at.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. So here's San Benito Street running north-south, the north edge of town here. This is the railroad coming through. Here's Highway 25. It curves through town like this. So these are the North Gateway sites along 25 where it crosses San Benito. And then these sites are along, I always forget the street changes its name, but yeah.
It's Santa
So
Ana.
hopefully that helps to orient you a little.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's Santa Ana and Buena Vista. That's what
Yeah.
turning to Buena Vista, right?
Yeah, exactly. Santa Ana turning to Buena Vista, precisely. Yeah.
So, Mr. Early, I
Yeah.
do have some questions. If there's no other questions from the other commissioners.
I have some questions.
Go ahead.
Okay, I would like to see more high density on the east side of town as well. I think we have a good opportunity to create some of those, either mixed use or because we do have commercial out there too.
Right.
The mixed use areas and some higher density areas in there.
Right. So I'm sorry to interrupt.
Oh,
we
no,
did talk last time about the mixed use node down at Airline Highway and Union.
Correct.
And you all were strongly in favor of that. So that would be another place we can add.
Yeah.
And create some minimum density 20 in there.
Mm-hmm. And along highway, the Highway 25 too.
Mm-hmm.
I know there's a lot of commercial that's going in there, but I think it's a good opportunity to put some mixed use in there also. For those people who, maybe want to have a live work situation. That they work from home and they can have an opportunity to do a live work situation.
Mm-hmm.
Something like that. And then as far as the letter that we got from CHISPA about putting housing up on Park Hill, I just want to bring that up. I worked up there for many years, and it is not a very viable place to put additional housing. The street, there would have to be major improvements, roadway improvements on that street in order to put additional residential up there. It's just not a very good place. I think that needs to be earmarked for parkland or, open space or something.
Yeah, hi, this is Chris. I'm gonna have to agree 100% with what Carol just said. My organization, we do a lot of work up there, working at the community garden and around the park and stuff. And it's not very viable for getting in and out, especially for for an elderly community. A lot of work would have to be done on that road. It seems like the backside of the hill is giving way as well. So it just doesn't seem like the right spot. And I think it seems like Carol said, the perfect spot for what we're going to get into later as far as arts and culture and parks and things like that.
I disagree. I think that it depends on what kind of housing. If we have like senior citizens up there or senior citizen building, that might fit quite nicely with a little community garden and the park and whatnot. So I disagree with the previous speakers on that. I'm still trying to figure out where can we put some of this high density, and I would like to hear from the staff because this map isn't very friendly. Like, I know we need to do it more infill, but I think it needs to make sense, and I can't tell what's around. I can't tell what would be a good fit and where. Like, I don't memorize all the maps of the city, so
Yeah.
maybe a little bit of insight.
Abraham, Eva, Amber, I don't know if you have anything to say off the top of your heads. Otherwise, what
Can I just
do,
chime in before staff? Because I want to
Sure.
just kind of add to the request from Councilman Resendez, because I kind of have a little bit of the same concerns. This isn't like a really good visual for me to envision like where everything is. Also, I know that there are there's building that's happening right now, and some of that building does involve some of the more at least multi-family units. So for example, I know that over like at the end of Mimosa by Wallywell Park, there's a lot of construction happening over there. Some of that is going to be some a little bit higher density housing. I'm trying to remember when we reviewed that project, like how much of it there was going to be there, but I know there's going to be some there. So also in answering Councilman Resendez's question, I would also ask that the staff add information about what's already in the works around high density housing.
Mr. Early, if I can jump in, if there's no other commissioners speaking.
Go ahead.
The questions. Several comments. I actually do kind of like the idea of affordable senior up on the hill. I don't think that would create much traffic, and I think it's a good place for some seniors. Most of the senior affordables, there's not a lot of traffic that comes from them, so it might be a nice place for them to enjoy the community garden up there. So I do kind of like that idea. Of course, I would want more information, make sure that there are no additional issues I don't know about. The question as far as the density, I think we have a lot of, well, not, I shouldn't say a lot of projects, several projects that were just annexed into the city. They haven't been approved yet, but the land was annexed. I would think that would be a place to start with the higher density, since those projects have not been approved, but the annexation has just occurred. So I think that would be very important. That would be the one of those along Buena Vista. I think the higher density would be important. I know they're claiming it's affordable by design, but I think if multifamily were in there, it'd probably be more helpful than just a bunch of smaller single family homes stacked together. I don't think that's the wisest choice. Along the corridor of Highway 25, there is a major project being planned in that area, and I think that's another place for the higher density to start occurring in these areas, because if we're having that density there, we can kind of, those that want to work in town can either commute locally, and probably a good place from that point. There's also another project that is trying to go through the system off of Santa Ana Road there near the elementary school, right there, exactly. I think that is absolutely a place for a higher density. I'm thinking even more towards the 40 to 65 unit in that development, because it's next to a school. It makes a lot more sense. There's two schools over there, so I think of higher density multifamily would make a lot of sense in that area. The question I have for you, we talked about last week, we had an area that we were considering estate lots. And so that would handle some of the areas for single family closer to Fairview. But there's also another project along Fairview, and I heard somebody mention it a little while ago. There's actually two projects, large projects. One is about 240 units, 250 units, and the other is 500. The 240 unit one is moving through. They already have their approvals. The other one has their approvals, but now they're going through an issue because they did not build in the units they were expecting to build in time. So we have to go back to readjust the development agreement. Is that an area that we could still talk about more density in now that we have to go back and discuss the new development agreement? Or is it too late to have that discussion?
I'm not sure of the site you're talking about, and I'm also not sure, I don't know, I would need to know more about the development agreement.
It's called West of Fairview. The project's called West of Fairview, and it would be a time.
Oh, down sort of. in the
Yeah,
lower
exactly
part.
right. Right
Yeah.
across the street from the other one that was in the county.
I don't know, Abraham or other staff, can you respond to that about the West of Fairview project?
Yeah, the mayor's correct that there is currently an amendment that's being proposed by the developer, the West of Fairview developer. Their development agreement expires May 1st, 2022. So a little bit over a year. And so they want to see if they can expand that development agreement further, because they have not had a final map or subdivision improvement agreement for all of their 6 phases. And so they are hoping to see if they can expand it, because they're not going to be able to complete their subdivision, their buildings in time prior to May 1st, 2022. So that's where they're at right now, trying to go before the council to get that expansion.
So I think, Mr. Mayor, just to add to that, given what Abraham said, you're not obligated to extend that agreement in any way. So it is a new negotiation. So if you want to come to the table, or you direct your staff to come to the table with additional negotiation points, you can certainly do that.
Thank you. And that's what I was looking for, an answer on that. So I would recommend, if we were going to do something more density, that would be an area to increase the density.
Right. Just for the record, I'm not sure you could legally redesignate it today. I guess you could, but you'd have to understand and probably state somewhere in the record that you understand that if that currently there is a vested right at that lower density on the site. It sounds like it's very unlikely that vesting will ever come to fruition. And then by putting a new designation on, that's what would be in place for the new negotiation. But in the meantime, you can't redesignate something and take away a right that was already vested, and it is vested, it sounds like, for another year.
Yes, sir.
Well, so with all of that, and I know staff and our consultant team have been taking notes, I would ask, rather than us trying to make an exact map right here in this meeting, I think what we're hearing is an agreement that we should look for other sites. We heard about the west side, the east side, along Santa Ana, in the West of Fairview area, down at Airline Highway, at Union, quite a number of additional spots. I think if it's acceptable to the committee, we'll take all that input and come back to you probably at the time of the Planning Commission and City Council when we do our next check-ins. We'll show a map with some changed sites for these additional designations. Would that be acceptable?
Yes, I did want to go back to the 125, the higher density, highest density conversation also, unless you're going to.
Yes. So I think we've brought closure then on these first 2 on the screen. About that, yes, we'll create a density with a designation with a minimum of 20, and we will use some of these sites and also more dispersed sites around town. I think then we can go on and ask, maybe we can do these together and ask what comments there are on increasing the high density to 65 and the residential in the downtown to 125.
No comments, sir?
No, I agree with that. I think it's a good idea.
I completely agree with the higher number in the downtown corridor. I think the conversation is going to be from what point would that be, from Santa Ana or a little further north, or from maybe Highway 25 to the core downtown. It's going to be important to understand that along San Benito Street.
I think I'd like to say is that back in 2005, there was, and speaking of the downtown, it was an exciting topic at that time. We were talking about new urbanism and revitalization for the downtown area and generating more foot traffic there. I am certainly, and I am amenable to explore creative ways that we can do that. But looking at higher density, at the nexus of higher density, I like to start by saying is that I think that in the north area there where we have industrial, I think there certainly is opportunities for an industrial workforce housing nexus there. The Park Hill, there's some good points that the Mayor Velasquez and Roland made about that. But knowing Park Hill, it does have some difficulty factors in its slopes, the terrain, and also there's earthquake fault that has to be dealt with there. But I do agree that from a traffic standpoint, Park Hill was certainly, there are certainly positive benefits for senior housing in that area, but that would have to be explored a little bit more. There was since I've been on the Planning Commission, I've heard a lot of public responses to sequestering affordable workforce housing and higher densities on the west side. I think we've kind of explored the west side, and we have apartments that have been built there, but agreed that we need to kind of disperse and integrate the workforce higher density housing throughout the community. I think there's some well stated remarks on the east side, and there is planning for Commissioner Roxanne Stevens was commenting about the new development going out there by the Southeast Park. And also we just talked about the mixed use little node down there by the school. There's also a nexus that I feel you have to be mindful about workforce and higher density with schools. So there's a school connection, industrial connection on the north side, and then quite, from the primary standpoint was the downtown area. The west side has already been pretty much explored with Buena Vista and over there on when I first moved to Hollister off of Rakovich, some of the duplexes and multifamily units, the west side apartments over there on the west side. So I think that we may look to embrace on the north and east, and also look for the creative options to increase the densities on the downtown San Benito Street. And I would go all the way down and maybe up to Santa Ana on that in relation to the downtown San Benito Street and how far it would reach north and south.
Okay. So I'm hearing overall then a consensus in favor of these raises, a lot of very specific input from Commissioner Huboy about exactly where. And I want to note for staff taking notes, the note that Commissioner Huboy said about the 500 square feet of open space. That is in the zoning, it's not a general plan issue so much as just there probably should be a general plan action to look at the zoning and perhaps specifically to look at that requirement. Because it is, I can say from my experience that that's going to be kind of a deal killer for downtown housing if you have to find a way, particularly if it's a requirement to provide that much open space on site, but even off site, it's going to get very expensive.
Question: is there like a vertical cap for downtown as far as if we do high density housing, residential? How high up can we go floors wise?
That is also contained in the zoning, not in the general plan, so I'm not sure what it is. Abraham or Amber or Eva, or Aurelie, can you?
75 feet in height.
75 feet?
If I'm not mistaken.
So 75 feet is approximately probably a 6-story building. All right, I think we've probably gone over all of this enough. We didn't really get consensus about the Park Hill suggestion from Chispa. I heard both sides. I think I heard more members saying that they would not support the redesignation. So unless those of you who really wanted the designation want to speak about it further, I think we probably, at least for now, not do a redesignation. That might come up again at the Planning Commission or City Council.
I think you're probably right. It's probably more of a conversation at the Planning Commission. Spend more time with it. It's one isolated property. I don't know if we need to be dealing with it here for the general plan.
Right, I would agree. All right, so for now, we'll leave it without a redesignation and we'll come back to it if either the council or the Planning Commission wants to bring it up, they can. So then the last question we had on this subject before we get to the arts is about this net density versus gross density. We've suggested to you, and staff I think has really sort of struggled to use the net density numbers in the past. We believe the yields will be greater, more housing opportunities if we leave the densities as they are in numbers, but switch to a calculation based on gross density. And I will point out, I didn't say this earlier in my talk, that the descriptions of the types of units that are expected, townhouses, apartments, and so on, are more in keeping with calculations at the gross density, using the gross density method, even though what you've been using is net density. So what you end up with is actually creating fewer housing units and different types of housing units than the general plan itself foresees because of this use of net versus gross. So our suggestion to you is to start using gross instead of net while leaving those numbers the same. Comments or questions about that?
I would agree with the gross.
Anybody else want to comment on that?
I agree with the gross also.
Okay,
I support
great.
that.
I would agree with the gross also.
Thank you, Member Johnson. Member Rebecki, sometimes we don't hear from you as much. Do you have any comments on this item?
No, I agree with the gross, the increase. I agree.
Great. Thank you. I think that's at least a plurality of you. Anybody else want to comment on that before we go on?
I agree as well.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Me too, I agree. This is Roxanne
Wow,
Stevens.
you got everybody, I think, on this one. Excellent. Thank you. All right. I think with that, we can go on to the arts and culture discussion. I'm going to just talk very briefly about this and then turn it over to Todd Bressi, who's going to lead more of a robust discussion, and we have some online polling for members of the audience. There aren't that many folks here this evening, so there'll be small polls, but we also will have an opportunity for those of you in the audience to really have some robust discussion. And I know some of you have come particularly to talk about arts and culture, and we're very excited to have you here this evening. So let me just open by saying that Hollister actually has, for a small town, it really has a very robust arts and cultural scene already. There are a number of arts and cultural organizations located in the city. A lot of arts and culture in the city is informal, related to the Latinx culture, mural making, street art, mariachi bands, ballet folklorico, a lot of different things that are both from the Latinx community, but also the farming community, the agricultural community, and the overall small town community of Hollister. And those are all things I think that folks really want to see continued. The park committee did meet already about these items and talked about their support for the items you see listed here: a creative placemaking master plan, enhancing funding, creating an arts and culture department at the city, doing more public art, including art as a part of future planning and development, increasing outreach to ensure participation and inclusion of the arts and culture communities, perhaps doing a survey, and exploring creative industries as part of the economic development program. So these are a lot of recommendations, many of which are already reflected in the work we've been doing, and some of which are new. We have put together a list of 6 possible goals regarding arts and culture. We're going to be polling you about those this evening, asking you if you would like to see all 6 of these goals and if any of them are more or less important to you, and if you have other goals that you would want to see in the document, in our general plan. And then we have a whole host of potential policies and actions regarding arts and culture in general, regarding funding approaches, regarding facilities and events, and regarding regulatory changes. And I'm not going to go into those this minute. We will go into them when we come back to the GPAC. But for now, I'd like to turn it over to Todd, and he's going to lead a discussion and some polling as well. So I'm going to stop my computer share and turn it over to Todd Bressi, who's here this evening as well.
Mr. Early, before we do that, maybe the members that were not on at the time you discussed the polling, you might want to update them on.
Okay. Yeah, I'll just say again that when Todd does put up, Todd and your staff will put up polls on Zoom, the way the technology works is that the polls are intended only for the audience members, the attendees, and not those of us who are called the panelists, which is the GPAC and the staff. And Zoom is a little finicky. If any of us who are quote unquote panelists touch the poll on our computer, we could inadvertently close it and end it. So please, if you're a panelist, a GPAC member, a staff member, don't touch your computer while the polls are being taken. And we'll just wait for the 6 attendees to answer the polls, and then we'll look at the answers. Todd, go ahead.
Okay, thank you and good evening, everyone. It's nice to have an opportunity to speak to you from Philadelphia, where I am. David, that was a terrific introduction. I'd like to add a couple of other things that make Hollister's arts and culture scene unique and very interesting. In addition to everything David said, it's also a place where you'll find people who are skilled at trades and work like auto body work, painting work, dressmaking, who've built creative practices around it. So it's an interesting blend of arts and those kinds of creative activities. It's also a place where you'll find a thirst for learning and participation in the arts. In school, in classes, and in informal organizations, I get the sense that it's a place where people really are engaged themselves as individuals in doing things, not just attending events. And I think it's a moment now, it's a place where there's hope that all of these activities, as well as public art, can be part of the heart and the soul of the city. And it's a very interesting opportunity to do this. Not many cities in California have arts and culture elements of their general plan. Certainly not many smaller cities like Hollister, and certainly not many cities that are somewhat rural like Hollister. So it's a very, very unique opportunity here that you have. What I thought we could do is we could start with a little bit of polling just to get some ideas and issues on the table and get people's take on what some of the major suggestions are in the policy document, and then we can spend the rest of our time in discussion of those, answering questions, hearing ideas about the different ideas that have been put on the table. So I'm going to need, is it Eva, will you be helping with the polling? Okay, we have 4 polling questions, but some of them have 2 parts. So what we will do is we will go through each one by one. And then when we get through each of the 4 polls, then we will have time for a conversation, a very informal conversation with the members of the public who are attending here tonight before we switch back to the GPAC. So the first question has to do with the goals that David showed you briefly, and which are restated here. These really are questions about how and why the city should be supporting arts and culture. And what I believe you can do is click as many of these boxes as you would like to indicate which ones are priorities for you. Which of these do you feel are most important? You can check as many or as few as you like. But the goals roughly are to collaborate or cultivate collaboration between the city, education, businesses, nonprofits, and artists. Those are all different sectors that are making things happen in Hollister already, but should there be some way of creating collaboration, perhaps through your new Arts Commission. The second is to make Hollister a bit more of a destination for the arts than it is. It's an interesting and tricky proposition. Can Hollister have more of a sense of being a destination for the arts to sustain the activities that are here, but not too much as to push things out. So it's an interesting balance. Another goal is to make sure everyone here has a chance to participate in artistic activities. Like I said, there's already a lot of classes and organizations and a very vigorous program in the schools for the arts. So should the priority be to really focus on that? And then there were, as David noted, a number of suggestions from the park and from others about increasing the amount of public art in the city, taking care of the public art that's already there. And then finally, another goal could be to make sure the city supports creative businesses and make sure the conditions are right for them to thrive in Hollister. So those are possible goals to consider. Eva, are you able to track the answers that we're getting?
Yes, I am able to track. It looks like we have 3 of 6 of our attendees who've answered the poll so far. So if anyone else would like to finish up, we'll give you maybe 30 more seconds to answer this first question, and then I'll share the results with everyone. Okay, looks like everyone
Can
has
we
voted.
mute? Can we mute?
Mr. Rebecca, is it possible you can put your microphone on mute, please? Mr. Rebecca, can you put your microphone on
I
mute?
think a host could do that too. Eva, can you mute Mr. Rebecca? Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, we did get six responses, and first of all the goals are supported by a majority of people here, and the strongest goals relate to leadership, building strong leadership and a cooperative leadership in the city, and to recognizing and supporting the diverse creative practices which exist in the city. The next most important goal is supporting people's ability to participate in the arts every day. But all of the goals received support from a majority of the people who responded. So let's go to the next poll question. Okay, so there are 3 other poll questions. One deals with funding, one deals with physical facilities and planning opportunities, and the third deals with specific regulations. So the funding question is 2 parts. The first is, should the city create dedicated sustainable funding for arts and culture activities? Just should that be something that's done or not? And then if so, what would the priority for city funding be? Should it be to invest more in public art or placemaking? Should it invest in arts events and festivals that are focused on local culture and creativity? Or should it focus on youth arts, education programming, particularly potentially pipeline to work programs for people who want to pursue creative careers but aren't necessarily heading to college? So those are, it's a 2-part question.
About 10 more seconds. Okay, there we go. That's everyone.
Okay, so there's a desire for the city to devote some of its resources to arts and culture, and the highest priority really is supporting education programming, helping link youth to creative careers, and then secondly public art and placemaking, and then finally events, festivals, programming. Okay, let's go to the third question. Third question has to do with what the city's priorities should be for planning for future kinds of arts and culture investments. And so the first question is, should the city commit to doing further planning for its arts and culture needs? And the second is, if it does that kind of planning, what would the priorities be? The suggestions are a creative placemaking or public art plan that would really look at the public realm, streets, parks, streetscapes, how public art could be integrated, or different kinds of creative activities could be integrated into those spaces, potentially even programming and events. Secondly, a feasibility study for a community arts center. This recommendation is not about what kind of art center it would be, because it probably would require a bit more research to learn what kind of center would best suit Hollister, how it could be funded, who it would serve. So the question is, the option is just to do that more in-depth study to learn what kind of arts center would be best for Hollister. A third option is to create an arts district. That could have a lot of different purposes, but among them would be to encourage creative economic development, potentially live-work space for artists, events, placemaking type projects. And then finally, other kinds of planning for more kinds of economic development related specifically to creative industries in Hollister. So again, check as many as you think would be important priorities for the city to plan more for in the future.
Looks like there are 2 more people, so I'll give you about 20 more seconds. Okay, it looks like 1 person hasn't answered, but I'm going to go ahead and close this now.
Okay. There's a strong desire for further planning to look into more specific priorities, and the 2 most important priorities would be a creative placemaking or public art plan that would look at the public realm, how it could be activated with creative activities, and a feasibility study for community arts center. Arts District did not receive the support of the majority of the people who answered the poll. Okay, and the last question has to do with regulations. And the first question is, should the city make sure that its regulations, like land use regulations or business regulations, encourage the growth of arts and culture activities in Hollister? And if so, what should the priorities be for the kinds of regulations the city looks at? Should it look at its land use policies, its zoning, to make sure they support the kinds of creative businesses, arts and culture activities that could be destinations for people to come to Hollister? And that could include places where performances or events like musical performances, dance, things like that could occur. Should it review its permitting, zoning, and licensing issues to make sure that vacant spaces can be put back into productive use as easily as possible for artistic or creative uses? Third choice, the third option is to look to see whether or not there are ways to allow for creative enterprises, like some of the ones I talked about earlier, to take place in residential neighborhoods or in other areas of the city where it might be appropriate, aside from downtown or business districts. These are businesses that tend to be run by individuals, and so could be run by them in their homes or in their garages or things like that. And then finally, to allow in industrial districts a range of activities that would allow for creative enterprises to flourish. So basically it's looking at neighborhoods, at vacant spaces, at industrial districts, and then specifically looking at options for destination type venues. which of those do you think should be something the city looks into?
I'll give about 10 more seconds if the last person would like to vote, and then oh, there we go. Awesome.
Okay. Strong support just about across the board for looking at ways that regulations can be improved to support arts and culture activities, really. The only one that did not receive 100% support was looking at home-based businesses in neighborhoods. So, okay. Well, thank you all for doing that. David, how much time would you like to have for a conversation right now?
I might suggest, I mean, there's only 6 people, so if each person spoke for 2 or 3 minutes, we'd be somewhere between 15 and 20 minutes. I think that's probably, I'm not saying everyone should just do that, but I think that probably creates a good sense of maybe we take about 20 minutes right now and then turn it back to the GPAC to give guidance.
Okay, that's great. I can't see who the audience participants are. You can though, right, Eva? You can see who.
Yeah, I think, Todd, if you go to down at the bottom, you'll see a tab that says participants, and a little, and you click on that box itself, and on your right-hand side, you should get a white panel that says panelists and attendees.
Okay, great. Okay, now I can see the attendees.
Yeah.
One person's attending twice.
Right, and Jennifer Lane's name is here twice, but I saw in the chat, and I'm afraid I've forgotten your name, but one of those 2 people is not Jennifer Lane, but is someone who used her link to attend. So
Okay.
if one of you raises your hand as Jennifer Lane, it may not be Jennifer, it may be the other person.
Okay, well,
Rebecca Pearson is her name.
Eva, I'll let you be the traffic regulator here, but let's just see if anyone who is an attendee would like to jump in with questions, with comments, suggestions, insight into these topics that'd be useful for the GPAC to hear.
Yeah, okay, so looks like I have a hand from Rob Rodriguez, so I'll go ahead and allow you to speak, Rob. Just give me 1 second. Okay, Rob, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Hello. Hey, so I think that our community definitely needs to invest in the, arts and culture. I think that we have a cool cultural history being here in California. We have one of the most unique environments. We have a cool history with the Indians and the Spanish that, colonized the area and whatnot. And so that needs to definitely be taken advantage of. But there's also, a lot of the communities nearby, Gilroy, Watsonville, definitely like the coastal communities, they all have art everywhere, and we're kind of lacking on that. I think that we do a good job at trying to keep up with it. And over the years, we've definitely come up with some cool art downtown. But from there's not really any investment, I think, that I've seen into big murals or something that our community can take part in, some kind of project that involves every different group. And like I said, I think it's just that it would be unfortunate if we didn't invest in it now when we're planning for the next 20 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there
Okay,
anyone else?
yes, we have a hand raised from Mr. John Roble, so I'll go ahead and allow you to speak as well. Go ahead, John.
Okay. Yeah, I was thinking that I don't see anything in the general plan proposals towards increasing the historical awareness of the history of our community. We do have the two historic districts that are pretty much adjacent to each other and maybe even overlap to some degree. There's quite a bit of other historical significance, many buildings of historical significance throughout the city and county. And I would certainly like to see something to enhance the city's appreciation of those things in terms of tourist visitation and educational value towards the historical aspects of our community. Seems like this is completely lacking in this plan at this point. Thank you.
While we're waiting for other speakers, I did want to just point out for Mr. Roble and other members of the audience that we did have some discussion of historic resources at our first of these 5 meetings, which was now 4 weeks ago. And we've had a lot of meetings and perhaps it's hard to remember all that, but we did have some discussion and got good guidance from the GPAC that they do want to see additional focus on historic resources in the general plan. So we will be doing that. And I think your point is well taken that there are certainly opportunities to merge arts and culture with the historic nature of the city also. And so it may be that we should make sure that that historic resources are part of the arts and cultural planning as well.
Thank you for.
I'm sorry.
We don't have other hands raised right now. I'm hoping that we might hear from some of the other members of the audience. There's one of our 2 Jennifer Lanes has raised her hand.
All right, either Jennifer or Rebecca, you can go ahead and speak and I'll rename you if this is Rebecca. It's Jennifer.
Oh, hi there. That was me. This is Jennifer Lane, although it's nice to see Rebecca here too. I'm Executive Director of the San Benito County Arts Council and member of the Public Art Review Committee. And I just really wanted to commend the City of Hollister, the consultants, and especially Todd Bressie for pursuing the arts element as part of the general plan. That's historic. It's the first time that that's being done for the City of Hollister, and it's really important as we grow. And I think we heard a projection that by 2040, we're expecting to be close to 100,000 residents, which is, it's crazy. I grew up here. And so I think this is a great opportunity. It's a unique opportunity. And it's time that we do this. So again, just want to really commend the consultants in the City of Hollister. We're really excited to see the creation of the new Arts Commission. I think the big question is, what is the commission going to do? How is it going to be funded? How is that going to be sustainable? And how will that, integrate with the general plan for long-term goals and priorities? So just want to say hello and thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other comments or questions from anyone who are attendees tonight?
We don't have any hand raised at this time.
David, would you like to move on? Would you like to?
Yeah, I think we can move on then. Okay. I want to really thank all the members of the public for being here. It's great to get some direct input about these issues and to get the polling results as well. I think they make a big difference in our ability to move things forward. So I'm going to go back to sharing my screen and we'll come back to the committee to give us some guidance on these issues. And I'm always the optimist. Oops, that's the wrong place. I'm always an optimist and I'm thinking we may end earlier than our 8:30 end on some of our previous meetings. And if that happens, that would be great as well. So we don't have to worry if we don't go till 8:30, that'll be fine. I'm going to try the screen share again, hopefully with a little more luck. I think there's the right slide, and I'm going to change this to view full screen. All right. And so Todd, maybe you can just help me to make sure, and even Amber, from the polling results that we recall all the things we just heard correctly. But the first item that we have for the GPAC to consider is to give comment on and perhaps confirm these 6 goals. And if I'm recalling correctly, Todd, we saw pretty strong support for all 6 of these goals, perhaps the 2 most important being leadership and the cultural environment, as I recall, but all 6 of them got support from at least 5 of the 6 members who filled out the poll. So Todd, am I recalling that correctly, or Eva or Amber, is that?
That's what I recall.
Yeah, okay, great. So yeah, but strong support for all of them. So I'll turn it over to the GPAC to say if you would like us to move forward with all 6 of these, or if you would like any changes or additions to them.
Hi, this is Chris. I'll go ahead and start. Yeah, I agree. We should be investing all 6 of those.
This is David Huboy speaking. I agree with Chris, and I think all these potential goals are certainly worth pursuing, knowing that we certainly have in our community a great pool of talented performers and artists, and the general public seems to react and respond to performances and graphic arts and murals that I think we can take it to another level. What I am intrigued with is when we talk about creative identity, develop a distinct identity for Hollister as a regional destination for arts. We think about all the people that go down Highway 25 to the Pinnacles and they don't turn towards Hollister because we have an opportunity. And I think that part of the creative identity would be to consider a cultural arts district that has the potential to embrace a destination development to bring some of the folks off of Highway 25 to visit our community. The cultural arts district, I think that, that ties in with the creative identity. And to me, that's the most intriguing potential that I think that we have the opportunity now to consider a cultural arts district. Now's the time to really take this opportunity to see if we can put Hollister on the map. And Hollister can be certainly a destination for a lot of the tourists that seem to go by and towards the Pinnacles and not turn in towards the potential that we have.
Thank you.
Hey, I want to chime in. I already spoke, but I want to double down on what David just said. And I want to also say something about what John Robles said about our history and tying all that in together. We need to be the gateway to the Pinnacles, like David said. And I think it's something that we could, it's a huge opportunity for us to expand our community and to really put a stamp on us as a small community that's going to remember our history through art and through culture. And it's just a great way of expressing, and positivity comes out of it at all levels. So I'm all about it.
Yeah, if I could just chime in and echo what the both of you said in terms of a specific item on here, the goal that's entitled place. Todd, it may be possible to add both something about historic resources and something about being the gateway to the Pinnacles into this sense of the place in the city, that somehow the arts are tied to that history as well as that connection to the land and the landscape.
I would think that the notion about the city's historic resources could be part of place, and I think David connected the idea of a gateway to the Pinnacles to the creative identity as part of looking at Hollister as part of a region of experiences. Hollister is part of, but can set itself apart from other cities like Monterey and Santa Cruz, and that are within its orbit. And so I think the gateway idea probably could connect to creative identity. And yes, it's very common for historic resources, cultural resources, preservation resources to be bound up into an arts and culture element of a plan.
So I think we have pretty strong support for these 6 items. Do other members of the committee, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Rebecki, Mr. Councilmember Resendez, Carol Johnson, any of you want to comment?
I think it's a great idea to include all of these. I think it's very important to include the arts and our history together and make it a gateway, to the pinnacles. I think that, working with the Arts Commission, we have a great opportunity to really move this forward fantastically. I think it's a great opportunity for us, and to be able to create, like David said, a place, an identity for this community to be able to showcase all of this would be a fantastic opportunity for us to grow this.
I like all of the goals. I don't really like narrowing or making it specific. I like how general it is, because I think with artists and with art, it organically turns into what it's going to be, right? So I don't like specifying it's going to be the gateway to the pinnacles, to be honest, because I think there's another community on the other side of the pinnacles that already uses that phrase. And I like keeping it pretty general. A lot of goals, of course, but I like keeping it open and very general and inviting and welcoming, because I think that art and then that message of who we are, it's going to happen organically. Like Jennifer Lane said earlier, we've got 100,000 people projected to be here in a number of years. Hollister is going to, and then we also should probably hire some type of consultant to make sure that we're not stepping on anybody's toes or using a phrase that someone else already has, I think. So I like keeping it open and general and warm and inviting, and the more the better.
And this is Roxanne Stevenson. And so what I'd like to chime in is I for sure support and agree with all of the goals that are spelled out. My only concern is not calling out funding, because I do worry about that piece. And that these end up being just words that we say, but do we really stand by them? And in order to stand by these goals, there has to be some kind of support, like real solid support behind them, which generally means funding. So I do worry a little bit about that's not really called out. I know there was a question in the polling around, there was a funding question around that, but I would feel more comfortable if there was a little bit more teeth to this, and somehow calling out funding. I think Councilman Resendez's suggestion around having a consultant, I think part of what if we were to do something like that, I think it would be real important for that person to explore, how to maintain some really solid, secure funding for arts in our city. And I think the reason that for me it's so important that it's called out is because whenever there are any kind of budget tightening or any challenges in any organization or any city, county, state, the place that ends up getting cut immediately, or it's like the first place that people will look to as sort of like arbitrary or it's something that we don't absolutely need, is art and culture. And I think if we have a little bit more teeth, then we can see art and culture in the same way that we see other goals. so that they kind of come together and they're seen as important as other goals. Because, for example, if we think about economic development, part of that includes tourism. And if we don't have a really solid art and culture feature to our city, then that will be really hard to establish. So I don't know how we have a strong pull for tourists if we don't have a strong face of arts and culture in our city. So I would just like to see a little bit more teeth in the goals, and I would like to see something around funding and supporting that. So anyway, that's just my only concern. Although I support all of the goals that are listed here, I do worry a bit about not having something around economic and financial support, weaved into this.
I think we will come to that in a few minutes, that we do have a whole section to talk about funding and financing. So Commissioner Stevens, maybe we could wait till then to talk about those items.
Yeah. Okay. I just think that it's an important overall goal, not, you know what I mean? I don't think it should be a subsection of something else. That's my only concern.
All right.
Okay, so I'll get my feelings on this topic now if everybody else has spoken. Arts are what will make our community a destination. And it's something we've talked about in our community for so many years. We have so many groups, as all of you have pointed out. Commissioner Huboy and I actually worked on trying to get a Center for the Arts built here in our community back in the early 2000s. And we had a huge amount of people that really wanted to see this thing happen. But we had very, very little support from government. And eventually government pulled the plug on the whole crazy idea of anybody ever wanting to have a Center for the Arts in the community. So we lost valuable time in our community for the arts. But you can see so many groups involved. I think government has to be part of this and has to be committed to it. Ms. Stevens makes a lot of good points, and we do need to look at the funding parts. We need to look at the possible impact fees if we're going to ever go for a center or a performing arts center in our community, because I think that's what, part of what makes a great community great is having the arts involved. I don't want, I think Mr. Resendez brought this up, the focus shouldn't be on one aspect of, say, for an example, the Pinnacles National Park. Arts go where the arts go. And we've seen this happen around the world. And one year something happens in a community and all of a sudden the world is paying attention to that community for some certain type of art that's happening through it. There was several years back where we decided to name Highway 25 within the city Pinnacles National Park Highway, with the idea that the county would join in with us. And the county absolutely said, no, we're not going to rename this road Pinnacle National Park Highway. So we've learned that lesson a few times, but I think the commitment to the arts all the way around is important for us. And it's what's going to make the difference for our community. I don't want to be the community that's just building houses. I want to be the community that's building a community of people that enjoy their lives and enjoy the arts. And it's a great place to come out for the weekend or spend your life here and enjoying life. And I think we can do that if we incorporate some of these components to our plan. Thank you.
All right. Well, so I think in a nutshell, I guess to try and summarize what I'm hearing, I think that essentially the goals are good as they are. We heard a comment not to get too specific with things like Gateway to the Pinnacles, but perhaps still mentioning the existence of the Pinnacles, the existence of the wider region and the natural setting. And it sounded like more of a consensus towards mentioning the historic resources as part of this. And then also something about sustainability or financial sustainability might be woven in here as well. It sounded like to me like those were the major comments in terms of any changes to this list of 6 goals. Is that an acceptable summary? And are you ready to move on to some of the specifics?
Yes.
I would agree.
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, so let's go on, and we will look at the broader policies and actions. This is the list of 7 items, sort of in a bullet form, in a nutshell form that we've put together for you. I did hear Jennifer Lane and others talk about, it sounds like one of the top priorities is the City Arts Commission. And then there are a number of other items here as well. We heard strong support for a set of actions through the polling we did also. GPEC members, do you want to comment on any of these 7 items, either in terms of removing them, changing them, or adding additional ones?
I do. Number 2, I'm concerned about city staff position to serve as a liaison. So I don't know, I want to be real specific that we're not going to create a new city staff position. We do have a city staff that serves as a liaison to the arts and culture enterprises. And it's just starting up again, like I said, because of the Arts and Culture Commission. So that's our Parks and Rec Director, Tina Garza, that's doing that. And then what is the strategic plan for the San Benito Arts Council? What is that?
If I might just say a word about that one, if I jump in here, Roland.
Sure.
He, as a member of the Park Committee, when we developed our recommendations for policy, what we called it is to develop a creative placemaking master plan. And I think there's some similarity there from a creative placemaking master plan to a strategic plan. I think that, and I agree, I'd like to take those 2 concepts, compare them, and see what the similarities are, and if that is or maybe that strategic plan is not as inclusive as a creative master plan. That's, to me, that's open for discussion.
Okay, I'm definitely open to that. Oh,
I'm sorry, I just was moving forward because here's actually the exact language that I wanted to put up just so you could see it.
And it looks like Jennifer Lane commented in here that it should be creative master plan or cultural master plan, not a strategic plan for the Arts Council. They already have their strategic plan. So I thought that was a little bit of an outlier there. So I agree with Miss Lane that it should just, and I definitely think it's valuable. It should be a creative master plan or cultural master plan. But I'm hesitant to put in the Arts Council, and I think she said that was a mistake. So if we can just include that language, that's fine. And the only reason is, like with the HDA and the Business Council and stuff that we brought up last week, we wanna stay a little bit open and neutral about naming specific agencies. So I definitely think we should have a creative master plan for sure.
Yeah. This is Commissioner Stevens, and I agree with that. I mean, I was going to suggest that we do something more general, like a broader plan for the city that focuses on arts and that pursuit. So I think a master plan makes sense, and without calling out a specific group. And I also wanted to go back to number 2. I mean, I'm going to just make that comment that I made at a previous meeting around, it's calling out specific positions. I think it's better to call out the function of the position rather than the actual position, just because we don't ever know what that means. It could be a staff, it could be multiple staff, it could be a contracted position. I mean, I think it's just a matter of getting the job done. So if we call up the function, and I just want to say again, just kind of put a plug for like the number 3 around the seeking the grants. I just think in general, just making sure that we have a solid way to have, just keep our eye on the funding. I think that in any creative pursuits, there's always that like right brain, left brain thing that we need to keep in mind. And what I mean by that is there's that creative side. So I think it's important to have input from people who are very artistic and creative. And then you have to have the more like the business side of that, who can, kind of keep their eye on the funding piece and some of the other less creative side, I guess, of the arts pursuit. So I think we have to keep those two functions in mind. So I think number 3 is important, but I just want to make sure that number 2, we're not calling out a specific staff position as simply doing a function of liaison to the arts, but that we're being more specific about what the functions are. And I think the pursuit of stable funding is really, and sustainable funding is really, really important. So I'd just like to make sure that we're calling out those two sides of it and not being real specific about a staff position.
So, and Councilmember Resendez spoke to number 2 also, so maybe just to focus there, it sounds like we're getting direction not to use the language that's there for number 2, and maybe to retool it to say something about ensuring that staff has the capacity to work on arts, culture, and creative issues, and that the city works to ensure funding for these issues. Keeping it quite general, not making any specific commitments, certainly not
Right.
calling out a specific position, but saying something about both staffing and funding.
Right, and I also just worry about using the word staff because it may or may not be city staff. I think the function, and for sure, I don't want to put more duties on maybe already an overworked staff member, but it's just, it's a function, and it could be that we may need somebody who's contracted, we may need an additional staff, we may need a current position to be retooled or thought in a different way, repurposed. But I just think what's more important than saying whether it's a staff position or not is to make sure that we have that function fulfilled.
I agree. And I think one way that we can do that is just to say city to serve as a liaison to the arts, culture, and creative enterprises, and prioritizes sustainable funding for the arts or something. You know what I mean?
I would agree with something in general to that language, yeah.
I think that would be good too, because you don't want to create a position to put somebody in there that's not capable of going out and seeking grants, because that's going to be an important function to be able to, go out and seek funding for these programs. And I think, when you look at somebody who is capable of doing funding, it's generally somebody who has grant writing experience that can come into a city and provide the city with that function and then act as the liaison between the Arts Commission and the city.
Can I just chime in there about the importance of it? I know staff in the position, but I think like Roxanne said, the function, that being a liaison to nonprofits, just like Carol said, finding that funding and being a grant writer is going to be huge. I mean, that's what the successful nonprofits have right now in town. They have good grant writers. And if the city had somebody that was a great grant writer, but could also communicate well with, the different programs, the different nonprofits, could be a positive liaison and communicate well with them to figure out what they need as far as grants and be a person that can interpret, those goals and those philosophies and those visions of our different projects and nonprofits, onto paper to get that funding. So I think it's important that, if it is a government position, that the function, like Roxanne said, is really important. And it's, it comes down to who we're staffing there at that point.
And I will say, I think we're getting a little into the weeds here. I see Roxanne's hand was up a minute ago. Roxanne, if you want to speak, let me call on you in just a minute. I want to suggest that.
No, I'm good. I'm good.
Oh, okay. So I think, though, that what I'm hearing is that 1, 3, 4, 5, and 6 on this list are good. 2 should be rewritten to talk about the function of the city, not with the word staff, but something about the functionality of the city and an ability to help with financing, not necessarily committing city funds, but something about both a revenue stream and human capital to work on arts issues. I think that's the rewrite of number 2. And then the rewrite of number 7 is a creative plan or a creative focus plan, master plan for the community as a whole and not specifically for the San Benito Arts Council.
Yes,
Is that a correct summary of the comments here?
I agree.
Yes, I agree too.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
So
Yes.
move on. All right, so I'm going to go on now to arts and culture funding. Let's see, so we've got, Carrie, are these these are two different issues or are they the same? We've got funding first, right?
Mhm.
Okay, so we'll go on to funding. And we've got the 5 items here. Comments about these. I know, Roxanne in particular already mentioned the importance of funding. I think we know that funding is clearly very important. And to what extent do you all as a GPAC want to incorporate these items, some of which are pretty specific, into the general plan? Are some of them too specific? Would you like to see additional ones?
David Huboy here. I know that when I looked into what other cities are doing and how they're funding their arts, I know that, for example, the city of San Jose has in the books a percentage of capital improvement projects. I'm not sure what the percentage is, 2 to 5%.
I believe it's 1%, which is actually a pretty significant amount when you get in. I once knew a guy who was in charge of trying to spend all the money at the San Jose airport expansion. And he had like 1% of $1 billion project. So it was a $10 million budget to do arts at the airport.
Yes. So I was just wanted to bring that into the forum here, is the possibility of having a percentage of capital improvement projects go to the arts.
If I can.
Please.
Thank you. I think the first thing we need to do is we need to develop a funding source, right? We don't have one. So that was a question, or that was a comment that was brought up earlier by Miss Lane. So that is something that I think can be done through the Arts and Culture Commission. And I think that there's lots of ways to develop that source of funding. So that's first and foremost. I'm not very comfortable about specifying that we're going to, so it says such as hotel taxes. I would strike that, because I think, again, we need to keep it very general. I don't want anybody saying the hotel taxes got to go to the arts. So I would scratch that, because that money might be earmarked for something else already. The other thing that I'm not comfortable with is develop funding streams for physical arts through the capital budget. Again, we have to develop funding for the arts, and then we can pull from the funding. So I don't want to be specific and saying it's going to come from the capital budget. Those are my 2 concerns. I think everything else looks good. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. And let me point out, and I very much appreciate the notion of rewriting number 1 and 2 to be able to not be so specific. I think, as I understand it, the point of number 1 is to talk about ongoing funding for activities, whereas the point of number 2 is to talk about capital improvements that are physical improvements that would be part of capital projects of some sort. So, in most city operations, we make a distinction between operational funds and capital funds. And I think that's what we're talking about here. Number 1 is attempting to talk something about the more operations side of arts and cultural activities. Number 2 is meant to talk more about capital funding for both for physical places, for physical arts, and things of a more enduring nature. But I think we can rewrite them to be less specific. Any other comments on these?
Yeah, if there's no other comments, I'll make a few comments. Is there any other comments from the commissioners? So I do want to go back to, as Mr. Resendez was pointing out, it's difficult in our community. We do receive such a low amount of tax revenue. So to call it out to be spent would be probably a mistake. I think the city's part in this could be that partner to make sure we can have events in our community and partner with the groups willing to put the events on to raise funds. And not only does it help raise funds, it actually brings more of those customers for the arts to our community. I think that is the win-win that we need to be looking for, having more projects that draw in more people to our community. I think as far as capital, if we're looking to create a project, we have talked about a project, as I mentioned earlier, and we've talked about something recently, a project within the community that could be the center point for our community. That could be done through impact fees if we can agree community-wide to go after a project. So that's something that can be done, because we can, of course, put that onto some of the newer developments having to pay part of the impact fee to make that happen. So I think through a partnership with basically the city backing up some of the groups to have more local events, which I think most of us would agree on, we could help raise funds that way. I think grant writers, it's best not to have a staff write the grants, but have those that are really the specialists out there that help write the grants. They seem to be more successful in getting those grant funds from what I've experienced so far. Thank you.
All right. So what I heard in that from the mayor's comment is perhaps, I don't know what number it would be, but a sixth item that might refer to something about partnering with local non-governmental organizations to enhance funding as well, that a city-private partnership might be an effective way to enhance the funding stream. And Todd, I think we can think about this offline, but I don't know if that goes in one of these existing 5 or if it's a sixth idea, but I think that's the mayor's idea, is this notion of partnering to enhance the ability to achieve funding.
Yeah, okay.
All right, any other comments on funding before we go on? Hearing none.
I'll chime in one more time. And again, I'm not a big, create more government jobs guy myself, but if you're going to invest in something like this and you want to be top notch, and we want to put ourselves on the map and all that kind of stuff, which I think we're all 150% on board with. I think you're just going to need somebody, working specifically for the people, that's going to, help again, go out and find that funding. And I think it just, I know right now we're kind of going off past and what we have right now. But again, we're looking into the next 20 years, and, 20 years ago, would we have wanted to invest in something like that? 20 years ago, I would say, yeah. And so, looking at the future in the next 20 years, I think it's definitely something that we should consider.
My only concern is that we have a nonprofit that does apply for those grants, and we would be competing with them. I think, like, we would go and apply for California Arts Council grants, and we have a local Arts Council chapter that does apply for them. We would go and apply for Lucille Packard. So it's the same pot of money, and it's coming back to our community. And I would be a little bit reluctant, just because we would be competing with the Arts Council and getting that money, and allowing them to do what they do best, right? Is to be able to spend it how they see it's going to best benefit. So that's my only hesitation with that.
Yeah, and I agree. And, it shouldn't be the role of that position to govern, necessarily how that money's spent. I'm thinking more of it being a position where it's going to be a governmental assistance to our nonprofits, because not every, nonprofit in town has, the resources and the investors from the public to support things. And again, I agree with what you're saying. And the way I want to look at it is the next 20 years. Is it something that we'd want to invest in? Is it something that would benefit, the making these projects happen? It just, I've kind of changed my mind a little bit as far as that goes. So anyway, I'm like I said, I'm just discussing and speaking freely.
Yeah, maybe the language that the mayor had suggested, a public/private partnership, that might cover that too.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. I think that ultimately, if you're having some sort of like a partnership, but a function of the city would be to support the the arts community, not compete with it. I think that's an important distinction, but I do think that there are going to be some artistic ventures that are specifically or that are solely like the responsibility of the city. And so if the city itself has wants to do something into one of our streets or to one of our buildings, and we need to have that kind of representation, or we need to have the work behind that, the effort behind it, that is really the government, that it really is coming from the government. I think we have to have that sort of function within the city government, but not a function that competes with what's happening in our community. But I mean, just understanding that a partnership is important, but also that there should be a clear function from the government, from the city, right? That supports the community, but also looks out for the needs of the city.
So I think we can take all of these ideas into account as again, I'm not even sure if it'll be a number 6 on this list or incorporated into one of the other 5, but this notion of partnership, not stepping on people's toes, certainly not lessening the capacity of existing groups to get money, but somehow enhancing that capacity through city-private cooperation. It seems like everybody's in agreement that those are important ideas.
Yes.
Yeah. Shall we go on then? We have 2 more categories. The next one is to look at cultural facilities and events. We have 9 items on the slide here. I won't read them all out. I know some of these, again, are kind of specific. Some of them are much broader. We want your guidance as to which ones you would like to see on a list actually in the general plan.
I think I'll be happy to kick it off here on
Please.
the number 7. Evaluate the potential for a naturally occurring cultural district outside of downtown. And that also ties in with number 9, evaluate the need for and means of creating artist living and workspace. I think we have like a special, potentially a special study area. The old Leatherback site, also potentially a place for a future transit hub right to the north of there. I know there's a lot of hazmat issues with that site, but if we're going to consider a geographic area for a cultural arts district, that one deserves, I think, consideration. And part of the vision that I see for that site is what I saw for example, in Oakland, where my sister, artist community there, they have abandoned industrial loft areas, lofts, very airy, a lot of skylights, natural light, where artists can live and work in those spaces. And I thought that was just so amazingly creative and cool to I'd go and visit and have communion with some of the artists, take my sketchbook. It's just a fascinating idea that a scenario that it lingers in my mind. If we could ever have such an environment, a creative environment, spatially, that can adapt old spaces like that to artists live in workspace, could be part of a cultural arts district as potentially ancillary space to maybe a plaza area or a performing arts center. Just some thoughts I wanted to put out there. Thank you.
So Commissioner Huber, if I could just delve in a little bit more, do you think, is that covered either in 6 or 7 on this list, or would you suggest maybe merging 6 and 7 and just looking in general for the notion of an arts and culture district somewhere? Or how would you either support or change this list in order to cover the idea you're talking about?
Yeah, I think there's certainly a synergy with 6 and Well, I was commenting on 6, actually 6 and 9.
Okay.
6 and 9 as part of that special place for artists. And when I say special place for artists, where they can live and work in that special place, but also that would be a part of a larger district where that there would be a venue where they could display their art and have performances. I don't know if that's going to work for our city or not, but I was just suggesting the old Leatherback space. It was it's no longer in effect. It's an abandoned kind of a factory building that I don't know if that has any potential for that type of a scenario, but now's the time to be looking at this, because this is our golden opportunity that if we do have a geographical area that we could designate as a cultural arts district, we need to define exactly where are we going to have this, and can it be destination development like we're all in concurrence about. The other ones, I establish a yearly arts festival. Oh yeah, that's definitely, yes. You know, that would take corroboration, and with the nonprofits and government would certainly play a role in that. Incorporate public art into city infrastructure and public space projects. Well, that's what that kind of what I was talking about earlier would be a percentage of arts from capital improvement projects, including small scale enhancements of existing infrastructure. Well, we're doing that now to a certain extent, and with the Public Art Review Committee, with the mural, the boxes, utility boxes, that type of thing. We're talking about doing some creative things with bike racks or bike portals, bicycle portals, and that also would tie into murals, various sizes. But those are just ones that I wanted to comment about, because those are paramount in my mind at this time.
Great. Okay, thank you for that. Other committee members want to speak to these things?
I do have something, if I can. So I know I'd like to keep things general, and I'm going to contradict myself here, but I'm just thinking that the function of the Arts and Culture Commission, when it develops a stream of funding, they would be the ones providing the mini grants if we decide to keep that on there. So number 2, number 3, can we specify that it's provide mini grants through the Arts and Culture Commission for small scale, et cetera, et cetera? Is that okay with you guys?
That's fine with me.
I just think it's the most appropriate body to do it, and we're going to get them up and running and pretty active, and that's something that they definitely can do.
So
is it appropriate for me to respond, David?
Sure, go ahead, Todd.
The question that you had, Roland, can you restate that, please?
So on numbers 2 and number 3, it says provide mini grants. I was wondering if we can say provide mini grants through the Arts and Culture Commission for small scale creative, blah, blah, blah. And for the second one, same thing, provide mini grants through the Arts and Culture Commission for murals and exhibitions. I just would like to add that language in there.
I'm fine with that.
Todd, did you want to speak to that?
Yeah. So first of all, those suggestions are there, like many of the other suggestions, because it's my perception that with a very small amount of resources, the city, relatively small amount of resources, the city could leverage strong results right now. Just by little bits of money here and there might actually unleash a lot of potential in places. That's what those recommendations are in that spirit. I think one of the other commissioners and Mr. Resendez, by your comments just now, there's a question of who really is in the best position to do things. And I think that gets back to what the mayor was speaking about in terms of partnership and collaboration. You certainly don't want different organizations competing to do things. One challenge about putting something that specific in something as overarching as a general plan, which is really meant to provide guidance for many years, is you don't really know who's in the best position to legally give out grants. Is the city able to give out little grants like that? It might be better if it's just a general, maybe even a more general goal than is written, or a general policy or action than is written there, which is to explore additional mini grants to seed small creative projects in the city, and then kind of leave it to the Arts Commission to figure out a way to implement that in the future, as opposed to being, I think I could see them designing the way that that's implemented, but maybe not being the entity that gives the grants out, at least until it's looked at more carefully through a subsequent analysis than we're doing right now.
Yeah, so maybe we can, instead of provide, like you said, explore and then not include the Arts and Culture Commission. Would that be something we could do? So it would say explore mini grants for small scale and explore mini grants for murals exhibitions. Yeah. Okay.
And I think Todd's also suggesting, I like the idea of consolidating some of these, and I think Todd's also suggesting that maybe 2 and 3 can be combined and become broader, that the small scale creative activations and the murals and exhibitions, those are examples, and maybe they can all be listed as examples, but that overall it's just this notion of mini grants, some role for the Arts and Culture Commission, and some of the things they may do, and that could all be wrapped up in a single action here.
If I can, any other comments? I'd like to make a few comments.
Go ahead, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Mayor, if I can, really quick.
Go ahead.
Sorry, but thank you. I don't know if I'm very much in favor of creating like an actual district outside of downtown right now, just because we're such a small community. Again, I think that might happen organically, and that would be nice to see it happen and take place. But I think definitely downtown arts and culture is something that we should be staying focused on. And then as far as outside, I mean, I think we need art all over, but I don't know if specifying a specific area without like the input of artists and everything, like, I just don't think that's something that I would be very much in favor of right now. I think we're still very small to do that, my opinion. Thank you.
When I have to admit, my understanding of the Leatherback site is that it's kind of at the edge of downtown, and I don't know if most people in Hollister would think of the Leatherback site as being a downtown site or an outside site, outside the downtown. So that's part of my thinking, that just to combine 6 and 7 and maybe even to add 9, that there's something about just evaluating the potential for some arts and culture district and including in it the possibility of both artists living and working spaces. I might combine all of 6, 7, and 9.
And that leatherback spot that Dave's talking about, like you said, being on the edge of downtown, there is a lot of development going on there in the little shopping center. And, there is a school right there, Rancho San Justo middle school's right there. And there is a lot of high density housing, senior housing right there. So it is kind of a nice little spot. And, I want to, caution everybody, we're kind of looking at things now, but this is, the GPAC for 2040. So 20 years from now, what is it, what is it going to look like? And I could definitely see, expanding, the quote unquote downtown to, that Leatherback area in the next 20 years. So that's just my little tidbit.
David, could I?
Todd, yes, and then I think the mayor wanted to speak also.
Yeah, and I also would like to make a comment and have a question.
Oh, please. Well, let's take Todd first, and then Mr. Mayor, you can either go or yield to Commissioner Stevens and go after her.
I would just like to provide some information about an arts district or a naturally occurring arts district. So an arts district doesn't really confer a lot of advantages on you, except for it focuses your attention on a certain area. The state has begun to designate arts districts. They're not accepting new applications now, but they will be soon. And if you are a state designated arts district, you get a few small advantages. But really, the purpose of having an arts district is for you as a city to focus your attention, your energy, your policy, your resources in a certain area. And how you do that is in a way that fits you best. It could be public space improvements, it could be business incentives, it could be the creation of facilities. It really depends on what you need the most. A naturally occurring cultural district is a very, very new idea. And it actually overlaps a little with some of the comments we heard earlier from the public about preservation. And I think it's the recognition that there are very important, in some cities, there are very important areas where there are creative practices, artistic practices, things happening, but they aren't really created by official arts organizations. You know, a place that's talked about a lot in this regard is East LA, the Willowbrook area of Los Angeles out near Baldwin Hills. Areas where communities themselves just have strong cultural traditions and practices. It could be things like music or it could be architecture, but somehow without being an official cultural district are worthy of the city's attention and care. And it might mean that all that means is that there's a park in that area that's kind of recognized as a place where these kinds of events are organized or sponsored or known, or maybe this area is promoted in some way. So it seemed to me that Hollister may be a place where this is an idea that's important given the nature of the kind of creative activities that happen there. And so it's sort of a recognition that there's a lot of creative life outside a formal arts district with formal arts organization, and that's, I think, what makes Hollister pretty special. And there may be ways the city can support that in the future. So that's why it's written as explore that idea. And it's like I said, it's a very new idea. It's really, based on thinking about equity practices and recognizing that there's art that occurs outside of art centers and museums. It occurs in neighborhoods.
Great, thank you, Todd. Mr. Mayor, you were next. I know you often yield to the other committee members. Do you want to go next?
I'll yield to Ms. Stevens.
So my only comment was, I do like the wording of naturally occurring, just for everything, a lot of the things related to arts and culture, only because what that means to me when I hear those words is that basically that government gets out of the way of something that would happen organically among artists or what the community is looking for. And so I'm thinking that, I think it's so important to call that out. And I just wanted to make that one comment, but my question was around number 9 and just the wording of it. So evaluate the need for and means of creating. And I was trying to make sense of what those specific words meant, because for me, like when I'm looking at something like this, what's the easiest way for me to come to some kind of understanding is to visualize like what I've seen or what I think would be great in our city. So I saw this one building in Sacramento that was specifically for artists, and the bottom floor was a 3-story building. The bottom floor was all retail. They were really small shops, and they had all sorts of different shops that were kind of like were some type of artistic ventures, including clothing, including just the traditional art, and then like even food. So there was some like chocolates that were a specialty and all these other things. But anyway, it was just all creative ventures, and they were for sale. There was stuff for sale. The second floor was workspace where the artists were actually creating the art, And sometimes that was opened up to the public so people could see how they created what they were creating. And then the third floor were single residency occupant units where some of the artists rented the space and they just lived there, but they were really tiny little spots. So I was thinking, if something like that were to occur, or that was something that artists said that they wanted, what would the city need to do to support that venture? And I would think that the biggest thing that we could do is kind of get out of their way so that they could make this happen. So I think that, so I'm thinking, when you use the words evaluate needs for and means of, does means of creating, does that phrase mean that the city figures out how we can support these naturally occurring efforts from the artistic community? Is that what that means? And if it doesn't mean that, then I would like to see something that really like speaks to that and some kind of effort of the city to get out of the way of these artists that are trying to accomplish something, and instead do what we need to do to support whatever the venture is, so that ultimately they can do something like that. I mean, the reason that I really like that one building that I saw in Sacramento was because it was a place where they could live, where they could do their work, and then they can also have some income to support what they're doing. So I really like that, but I don't know that something like that is possible in our city, given like our ordinances and, you know, zoning and all the other stuff. So I just want to make sure that what we're putting in here conveys the message that we support the arts and that we can get out of the way as when needed. Maybe have even some ordinances that provide some flexibility when it's an artistic venture.
Go ahead, Todd.
Thank you. I think that what you just said is very much in the spirit of what the next slide is about, which is examining your regulatory frameworks to do exactly what you're suggesting.
Okay.
Figure out, and to be truthful, I'm not aware of any specific, I have not examined the zoning code to know if there are specific issues, but the idea is that you would look at your regulatory framework to see if there are ways that you could improve your regulatory framework to allow for those things to happen, which you're describing. The wording before that you asked about, maybe not the most elegant wording, but what I had intended to mean was to evaluate the need for artists living in workspace, and then find out how it could be created without necessarily implying that the city had to do it itself. It could mean, for example, that you actively recruit a company that like ArtSpace from Minneapolis that knows how to build these things, and invite them to Hollister and see what they would say about building something there. Looking at, as you said, whether there are not just barriers in your code, but potentially incentives that you can place in your codes to encourage people to do this. So it's not just about removing friction points in your regulations, but also are there ways you can create incentives in your regulations? That's what that means.
Okay.
The means of, that's what that means.
Sure. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so I'm aware of time, and I want to at least get us done by 8:30. And as Todd said, we do have one more slide to go. Mr. Mayor, do you want to kind of wrap up here, and then
I just wrap it real quick.
Yeah.
Just want to point, number one, the Community Arts Center is really an important piece that we need to be focused on. We've been talking about basically a community center here for the last several years. We've had some issues, but I think we can get there, and it's a very important piece. I'm glad that we see it, number one. Todd, I totally agree with the things you've been saying. The government or the city really it's a way to kickstart some of these things to get them moving, because we do have the potential power to move them forward. And that's kind of what I was talking about as the partnership part of this. And, establishing yearly art festivals. Today, for an example, I was meeting with the city manager about vehicle barriers that are easy to move around so we could have more activities in downtown, shut the streets down more often to have these festivals maybe not yearly, more often. And that's the key to bringing more of the arts. Downtown, I think, is a perfect spot for the creativity for artists to come here. I think we can work on putting together some ideas to encourage more live work spaces. And I think that's very important to start bringing that in. And I want to let everybody know the Leatherback site, we're looking at that as a potential recreational facility out there. So it's really probably not something that's going to happen there, but all around downtown, around McCrae, there's a lot of potential for future projects that can include the arts. And I think if we establish that in some of the zoning, some of the different ways that we talked about tonight, we can make that happen pretty quick. So I think it's just a matter of us just understanding and appreciating it and committing to the arts, and we can get there.
Great, thank you. So I think in summary, the major changes I think we're talking about are possibly combining numbers 2 and 3 to just look more broadly at grants, maybe make some reference to the new Arts and Culture Commission without necessarily saying that they are the awarders of the grants, but that they have a role, and giving the things that are listed in 2 and 3 as examples of the kinds of things that the mini grants might be used for overall to activate the arts. And then I think I also heard that because we don't know exactly where a district might be, but a district is obviously important, 6 and 7 might be combined to really look more at an evaluation of what kind of district could it be and where should it be, without talking, and maybe having even some reference to naturally occurring in it, but without trying to distinguish between inside or outside of downtown. And otherwise, I think there's pretty strong support for all of these. Is that accurate?
Yep.
Right, agree.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's go to the last slide then. On regulatory changes, Todd already mentioned these in passing. We have 4 items here to see what the city can do. And I mean, some of you have already spoken to the idea of what can the city do to get out of the way of naturally occurring artistic enterprises, making sure that any permitting zoning issues are resolved, that there is an approval process where there needs to be approval process, and really trying to do whatever can be done to streamlining the permitting process for the arts. Comments, statements about those?
Yes. Why do we have to establish the approval process of a public art on private property, such as murals?
So we've heard anecdotally that there have been difficulties with people having this. I don't know if they were actively told you cannot paint that mural, or you need a permit, or they simply didn't know whether it was allowed. But anecdotally, I've heard that there's been a lack of clarity about whether a private property owner can simply put a mural on their building.
Are you talking specifically here in Hollister?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't like that at all, and I'll tell you why. Because it's a private property, number one, and I think the more art, the better. I don't really like this approval process. People should be allowed to do art, and as long as it's not offensive, they should be able to paint whatever they'd like. So I would completely strike that one. And okay, go ahead, Mr. Bressi. Did you want to?
Sir, please finish. Then when David calls on me, I'll speak.
Okay, sorry. And then the other thing I wanted to say was I would really like to see, and I don't know if this is the appropriate place for it, to look at establishing an impact fee to again create some type of sustaining revenue resources for. So like a certain percentage that can either be dedicated if you're going to develop here to public or to art in general, and if not, then you pay into the an in-lieu fee that would be that funding source, part of the funding source. Those are my 2 comments. Thank you.
Todd, you want to respond to either of those things? And I might say a couple of things also. Go ahead.
I just want to cross-reference the funding suggestion you made was in the funding slide. So we would want to make sure we pick up your language.
Right, yeah. So I think, Councilmember, I was going to agree with that point, that it's in here that there already is something about establishing funding streams.
As to your first point, this is a very tricky subject, and really this language might be better if all of it is sort of explore rather than create, to make sure we really understand what the issues are. And if you look at it that way, these the first 3 points, or actually all these points are places where there are often conflicts between codes and arts activities. That's where you would begin to look for making sure your codes do accomplish what one of the other committee members was speaking about a little earlier, Roxanne was talking about. The reason, council member, that last bullet is there is because I've heard the same things anecdotally that David was reporting, and what is common is that people who would like to put murals on their buildings run afoul of sign codes and requirements for, the amount of space a sign can cover on a building. And so they're told they can't put a mural up because it's in violation of the sign code. Now, again, it's anecdotal, so it really is something that for our general plan really should just be something that is looked at more carefully down the road. But the purpose of the approval would be to allow to do exactly what you were suggesting, would be to say, oh, well, that's a mural, so therefore we can approve that. It's not a sign, so you're not violating the sign code. It's not the intention is not to approve a mural because we like the art, or it's more to approve the mural so someone can go ahead and do it and not run afoul of other codes like sign codes.
If I can, Mr. Bressi, this is my hesitation with that. And I've been on the other side. I've done murals on private property where some people were not in favor of them, I would say. And they've been probably one of the most successful, most photographed murals here in our city. So my hesitation, again, as Commissioner Stevens has pointed out, is that we want to support and promote the art and the artist. When you have an approval process like this, it can tend to do this. It can do the opposite of that. You can get tied up in bureaucracy, and it slows things down. And then artists are not able to go out and to paint a side of a private building. If people want to argue, which they have, and we've had this conversation in lengths. There's even been ad hoc committees ad hoc committees made to try to regulate this, then let them argue it. But we do have a municipal code that says it's defined as art and it's not a sign. So they haven't been able to do anything to stop these artists that want to paint up on private buildings. So I see this as very restrictive, and I would be very opposed to having that on there. I think people should be able to paint what they want, and artists should be able to go out there and get commissions, make money, beautify the city, and get things done without having more red tape to go through.
Councilmember, I really want to underscore that I think both Todd and I totally intend exactly what you're saying. And in fact, it's because of these anecdotal stories that people have, for whatever reason, gotten a message or thought that they needed some approval to do a mural, that we want to try and establish, should there be a process, and if so, try and keep it as simple as possible. I think your point is well taken, that we need to change the words of number 4, and maybe it's just a policy statement that's, if it really is in the municipal code already, it's a policy statement that just supports what's in the municipal code, which is that murals are considered art and free speech on public property and do not require permits. And that could be stated as a policy statement if that's ultimately the will of the council in approving the general plan. A couple of things have already come up in this discussion. I think you said as long as they're decent or not indecent. And so then you get a question of how do you tell that and who regulates that if you were going to make that finding. And there's also been a concern, at what point do they become a sign or an advertisement? And I think, the Supreme Court at one point said, we know it when we see it. Maybe it's clear sort of in general, what is a billboard versus what is a mural. But I think we would all agree that we're not trying to allow infinite billboards painted on the sides of walls. We are wanting to enable people to do good quality public art. So the devil is in the details, but I think all of us agree we're not wanting to constrain people. We're wanting to clarify that if they want to do an art project on their building, that's something the city supports. And number 4 is trying to say, let's try and figure out exactly how to clarify that support for public art on private property.
So one last quick point. This says private property. we do have a policy in place and to approve the process of public art on public property. We do have the PORC review, I think PORC or Public Art Review Committee. There's a process in place for that, but this is private property. And that's why I think that there needs to be distinction between public and private.
Right.
We shouldn't restrict art on
Right.
private property
Right.
at all.
But am I correct, Councilmember? I mean, I think I know you well enough. I'm assuming you would not be in favor of something so unrestrictive that somebody could put a billboard on the side of their building that's an advertisement.
Well, that wouldn't be art, that would be a sign.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So I think we need to, we'll go back and look at this language. I think what we need to do with staff is just ensure that actual public art that's neither offensive nor advertising can move forward without onerous permitting, perhaps without any permitting at all, but that there are some guardrails in place that if somebody does start painting a mural and it is either offensive or advertising, that the city has the ability to go in and say, actually, that's not a mural, that's not art, that's something else, and we do regulate that.
I think if I can jump in real quick, I think maybe if you can go back and look at our code, and the issue that Mr. Resendez is bringing up is a recent mural I painted on my building that the public loved, but a few people did not like it because it just said Hollister. And there was many people attempting to have that painted over because they didn't like Hollister, and they used the excuse of that's a billboard. Well, it's pretty proud of Hollister. So I think if you can look through that code to make sure we don't have a situation where it becomes an approval process of the art. Of course, you do have the other argument about what's obscene or different things, but I think thankfully it was there, and it was proven correct that it was art, it was a mural. One of the other things I want to bring up and see how this fits in here, we are now talking about in the city a entertainment zone in the downtown area, which helps create some of these other activities for music, dance, and some of these other things happening. So I don't know if that fits in there, or if that's something we just deal with as we're dealing with it now at the city, or if that should be in the general plan.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you want to cover that or not. Do other committee members want to speak to that?
I think if I might say a few words about that, and thank you, thanks to the mayor for bringing it up, because I think we can really, and if we can do that with a general plan, have specific policies to promote entertainment and music events within the downtown area, if that can create leverage to that, I think for sure that we should explore that, because our downtown really, what it's really lacking, and I've always liked to go to San Francisco. I love jazz music. I played, and I've always liked to go to Roland's nightclub with the beautiful calligraphy of the neon signs. I'm happy to say that I think from the sign committee that we are now including as a possibility of having neon signs to kind of bring out some little bit of a flair and some gaiety to the downtown ambience. But yes, I mean, we have so many musicians that I know personally that would love to have a venue where we could, and with the expectation from the general public that they can go there and they can appreciate live performances. If we can somehow transform some of the lifelessness of our downtown into a more of a venue for nightlife and for excitement and for appreciation of musical talents and performing arts. If we can do that with our general plan, I'm 100% behind it.
And so I'm hearing that then it's both about, it sounds like this new item is primarily about live performance, but it's both indoors and also outdoors within public spaces that
Yes,
both
correct.
Commissioner
Yes,
Dubois
that-
and the mayor are speaking to. Yes. Okay, I think we can add that either. I mean, part of that is covered in number 2 that talks about creative use of vacant spaces. But I think the implication there is more indoor spaces, and we should just make sure either within number 2 or as in number 5 that we cover live performance, both indoors and outdoors.
Yes.
Yes.
All right.
I'll go ahead and chime in as a community member here as my role, and agree with the mayor and Dave that you know, some entertainment space with live music. It just goes with, again, doubling down on the arts and the culture and everything. And I think it's something that our community needs.
Okay.
I would agree.
Excellent, Carol.
David, I have a question. What does resolve permitting, zoning, and licensing issues to support low impact creative enterprises in neighborhoods? What does that mean?
Again, I'm not sure resolve is honestly the right verb here, but I think what we're wanting to do is we have heard that in some cases in Hollister and also in other cities, and Todd already mentioned this in passing, that as artists come into neighborhoods and want to do, call them creative things, they sometimes run up against permitting, zoning, or licensing issues where a city government will say, oh, you can't actually do that because it doesn't fit within our codes or our permitting processes. And we're saying here that we want to, before these issues arise, we want to understand what they might be and try and make sure that Hollister really is as friendly towards low impact creative enterprises as possible.
So are we talking about neighborhoods meaning like in the downtown area?
I think we're talking about the downtown, but also possibly industrial neighborhoods, and where they're low impact, possibly even in residential neighborhoods.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I'm aware of the time. It is 8:30. This is our traditional end time. Unless there are other comments or questions, I think we should wrap up. I think we've gotten very good input from all of you and some good guidance, and we'll be working with Todd to update these documents and move them into the general plan itself. Does anybody want to make any final comments before I just look at next steps and we allow the mayor to close the meeting?
Just one final comment that I had, if I think it's a good time to bring it up, is that, and it was on the PARC list of policy recommendations.
I can
and
go
also,
back to that if it'll help.
It ties into the historic comments from John, I believe his name, made, is ways to preserve the art that we have, not only preserve it with the archives, but also maintenance policy or maintenance to maintain the art inventory that we have.
I'm trying to use my cursor to point at this one. Allocate resources to manage the city's public art collection, creating an interactive public art walking map. I think that's
Right. I
the one
didn't see anything that addressed that.
Right. I'm imagining that all the committee members would support something like that, and that Todd and we can find a place to add that idea somewhere within the document.
Great. Thank you very much.
All right. Any other items before we go on to the closing? All right. Well, let me just wrap up by reminding you that we have one more in this series of 5 meetings. We are taking next week off. We'll be back in 2 weeks for our 5th and final meeting. We'll have other members of our consultant team present to talk about climate change and greenhouse gas emissions, natural hazards and the local hazard mitigation plan, and sustainability. That'll be the 5th and final one of the meetings in this series. And then in late May, we'll come to the Planning Commission, and in late June to the City Council. I might mention also that we are planning in early May a Spanish language workshop to work with Hollister Spanish-speaking residents to go over all these same issues and gather additional feedback that we'll be bringing to the Planning Commission and City Council as well. So that's not on this slide because we don't have 100% date set yet. I believe it's May 6th, but we will get an exact date to people, and we'd encourage you to let the Spanish-speaking residents of the city know about that so that they can fully participate as well. With that, I would like to turn it over to the mayor to close the meeting.
Oh, thank you very much. And thank you again, all the commissioners and the public that participated today. Again, another good meeting. As was mentioned, we will not have a meeting next week, and we will see you at, was it 27th? On the 27th. So thank you, everyone. And is there a motion to adjourn this meeting tonight?
I'll make the motion.
Thank you. There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion is second. All in favor?
Aye.
Bye.
All right, everyone. Well, thank you very much, and we'll see you on the 27th.
Good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night. Good night.